Dragon Ball FighterZ is the Dragon Ball game I've always wanted. When I first got my hands on the original Marvel vs. Capcom in 1999, I knew the Dragon Ball franchise would fit the high-octane, fast-paced, combo-driven craziness of the Marvel series better than any other franchise. This desire for a team-based Dragon Ball fighter only became stronger over the years as Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and 3 were released and provided some of the most exciting gameplay and moments in the history of fighting games. There was a steady supply of Dragon Ball games released in the 2000s, starting with Budokai on the PS2 in 2002. During that time, many different Dragon Ball games spanning various different genres were released. There were definitely hits and misses, but overall, I felt like no Dragon Ball game quite scratched that itch that a traditional fighting game did. Often, developers of Dragon Ball games prioritize making the game quote-unquote feel like Dragon Ball at the expense of things like good balance and fun skill-based gameplay. But in 2017, with the announcement of Dragon Ball FighterZ, it seemed like the people in charge finally got the message and decided to make my dream become a reality. Developed by Arc System Works, who previously worked on Dragon Ball Z Extreme Butoden and the Supersonic Warriors games, but is better known these days as the team responsible for the incredible Guilty Gear games, Dragon Ball FighterZ is a traditional fighting game first and a Dragon Ball game second, and it is so much better off for it. At the same time, I'm hard-pressed to find another Dragon Ball game that is more of a love letter to the original manga and anime than FighterZ. Let's start from the top. Out of the box, FighterZ delivers on everything you'd expect from a traditional fighting game. A solid, varied, playable character roster, 13 stages, a full fleshed out single player story mode, arcade mode, versus mode, various tutorials. But this is all a given, right? I mean, I shouldn't even have to bring this stuff up as a positive. Well, unfortunately, in recent times, high-profile fighting game releases haven't even delivered on some of these very basic features. Luckily, that is not the case with Dragon Ball FighterZ. There is no cynical feeling surrounding this game, and for good reason. Nothing here feels rushed. Never does it feel like a ripoff. There is no overabundance of recycled assets from previous games, or constant attempts to sell the player DLC or forced microtransactions. On the contrary, FighterZ is one of the most polished fighting games I've ever played, and the $60 package here is certainly feature complete. The game does a good job teaching the player its basic mechanics, but there is no doubt that FighterZ is very complex. Having only played about 50 hours of the game so far and watching just the first week of high-level tournament play for the game, it's clear that the skill ceiling is high here. If you really want to take your game to the next level, you're going to have to start exploring YouTube or following the right people on Twitter for character-specific combos and advanced techniques. I've seen many beginners confused and overwhelmed jumping into the online ranked mode for the first time. If you're new to playing traditional fighting games, I don't think you should panic. It's going to take some time to grasp all of these concepts, so don't get discouraged if you jump online and just get bodied. This is the type of game the fighting game fans have been playing for well over 20 years now. It's not going to be easy to learn how to play 3 characters, let alone the entire 24 character roster, which is what you're going to have to do if you want to start stacking up those W's. FighterZ is a 3v3 team-based fighting game with assists, similar to Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and 3 before it. And just like in those games, the playable character roster is very important. Besides the fact that FighterZ is based on a beloved franchise filled to the brim with iconic characters, when you're choosing 3 characters per match and fighting another 3 characters per match, you're going to be cycling through a whole lot of characters. Either you want a really massive roster so you don't see the same characters over and over, or you want a smaller roster that is incredibly deep, varied, and offers a unique experience every time you play a match. ArcSys chose the latter approach with Fighters. It has 24 characters included in the base game, with 8 announced to come soon via DLC. And overall, I am really happy with this character roster. There's no glaring omissions as far as I could tell, though I could nitpick, like if we're gonna have 2 Gokus for example, then Kid Goku totally should have been there over Super Saiyan Blue Goku, but I could at least understand why the decision was made to have each playable character in the game. In the end, everyone feels unique and fun to play, and even characters like Super Saiyan Blue Vegeta and regular Super Saiyan Vegeta, although they seem similar on the surface, they have plenty of differences in their movesets. Think Fox and Falco in Melee. If all goes well, here's hoping those 8 DLC characters fill in some of the gaps in the franchise. I'm personally hoping to see some original Dragon Ball and GT representation, some more female character representation like Caulifla or Kafla, and if the game sells really well, hopefully Fighters will be supported beyond those first 8 characters and we get more and more content added over time. Xenoverse 2 is still being supported with new content over a year after its original launch, so here's hoping we can see the same thing here. But before we jump into that versus mode and get into the nitty gritty of why this game is so satisfying to play, I think we should get the bad out of the way first. I gotta give Fighters props for coming fully featured with an original story mode, including character designs and supervision from Akira Toriyama himself, but it's too bad that the story mode kinda sucks. Simply put, the story mode is a bit of a mess. It feels really tacked on and super unpolished compared to the sublime presentation going on with the rest of the game. Plot-wise, it's as generic as it gets. There's another android. She's evil. You have to fight evil clones of all the characters in the game. And then for some reason, the android becomes a Majin Buu-esque character at some point, and she starts turning people into candy and eating them? So really not even Majin Buu-esque, she's just literally a female Buu. It's completely lacking in originality and sticks out like a sore thumb in an otherwise awesome package. Worst of all, it's boring. The pacing is horrible. So many of the cutscenes feature the characters just standing around, staring at each other. The player is constantly scrolling through boring, repetitive dialogue. It also doesn't help that you have to do this 3 times, as the story mode takes place over 3 quote-unquote story arcs. This was a bizarre choice because they really aren't arcs in the traditional sense. It's the same story featuring the same characters, but from a slightly different perspective, and the events of the story are slightly reimagined. It's hard to explain without getting into spoilers, but I really think the game would have benefit from compressing this story into one solid arc, taking the best bits from each of the 3 boring arcs that we ended up getting. Instead, we have a bloated, overly long story mode that just gets really boring and just couldn't keep my interest. The plot itself felt a lot like Plan to Eradicate the Saiyans, with a bunch of clones standing in the way of our heroes, and it all leads to a final showdown with a fairly generic main bad guy, or in this case, main bad gal. If a story is bringing up memories of Plan to Eradicate the Saiyans, that is not good. Unfortunately, Fighters falls into the same trap that many other fighting game stories fall into, forcing the entire character roster into the story, and it just doesn't work most of the time. Think about it. How do you get long dead, largely irrelevant characters like Nappa or Captain Ginyu back and involved in the story? You don't. It comes off as weird and dumb and forced, unfortunately. So usually, one of 2 routes is taken in a Dragon Ball game to feature all of the playable characters in a story mode. One is a retelling of the Dragon Ball story, which we've seen time and time again. Or 2, an original story that somehow finds a way to bring all of the characters from Dragon Ball back. And that usually means somehow reviving a lot of dead characters, which means clones. Or spontaneously reviving a bunch of characters from the dead. And as the viewer, you just kinda gotta go with it. It's a thing we've actually seen time and time again in not only Dragon Ball games, but in movies as well. And yet, despite all of that, there's still a number of no-shows in the story. There's no hit, there's no Goku Black. Beerus shows up for a cup of coffee but is never playable. You know, all those interesting new characters? Yeah, totally uninvolved here. But there's no shortage of Nappa though. It's really bizarre that they went through all of this trouble to write this weird story involving clones of every character, and yet they still leave out a bunch of the playable cast in the game. It almost makes me believe that the Dragon Ball Super characters were added to the game later in development after the story mode already wrapped up. That's just my theory, but again, I just don't see why they wouldn't just include popular characters like that. Honestly, for a game that is so finely crafted and is such a love letter to the original story and has such an attention to detail when it comes to replicating all of that stuff, I kinda wish that they just adapted the tried and true story of DBZ with this game, starting with Raditz and showing us all of those iconic, beloved scenes from the franchise running in this gorgeous FighterZ engine. Even though we've seen Raditz debut many times over the years, FighterZ is clearly something special. It's a game that will be played and remembered for years to come, as opposed to so many of the yearly formulaic Dragon Ball titles that just get cranked out and we just kind of play and forget about them after a month. So for that reason, I really would have preferred ArcSys just take on the story of Dragon Ball rather than craft this original story which features memorable moments like the character standing around having a conversation about links, transitioning from animation to animation like robots, as the camera stays completely static. In the end, the story mode we are left with is just totally forgettable. It isn't all bad though. One thing the story mode nailed is the various unique character interaction cutscenes, which are optional, but I recommend going out of your way to check them out. Arc wrote skits involving some of the strangest combinations of characters I've ever seen, but it all works so well. The writing here is so on point. I've been bursting out laughing at some of the sheer silliness going on in some of these cutscenes. I'm sure you've all seen the various clips of characters roasting each other in the game already. It's really great and proof that the writers behind this game really know their stuff and totally understand the characters and their various relationships with each other. So again, it's a shame that the actual plot and main focus of the story mode is so weak and flimsy in comparison. I would have liked more of these silly little character interactions and less of the trotting, slow main plot centered around Android 21. Luckily, a fighting game doesn't live or die with its single player mode, and that is especially true for Dragon Ball FighterZ. The game truly shines where it counts the most. Its satisfying, fast-paced gameplay, and the unbelievable level of polish as seen through its gorgeous presentation and graphics. The FGC has already lovingly adopted this game, as FighterZ is seemingly filling that versus game void that unfortunately wasn't really filled by Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite.
Yo, son, this man is looking like a ping-pong machine. This man is playing tennis right now with his characters. Oh my god!
Just 1 week into tournament play and the game already looks stylish, expressive, and most importantly, hype as hell. People are excited to play this game, and for good reason. It's based on a cartoon everyone loves, and it's a ton of fun. At the same time, FighterZ is such a great package that it's even capturing the hearts of people who had zero interest in Dragon Ball up to this point. This all stems from the presentation, which is legitimately some of the best I've ever seen in a game, period. The visuals caught everyone's attention at E3 2017. Whether you were a fan of fighting games, whether you were a Dragon Ball fan, it didn't matter. Everyone was talking about Dragon Ball FighterZ, and for good reason, because it is beautiful and captures the look of the anime better than any other Dragon Ball game that came before it. When it comes to flashy, stylish, cel-shaded graphics, ArcSys are literally the best in the world. Guilty Gear Xrd was already praised as one of the best looking games ever, and now their prowess is being applied to Dragon Ball with FighterZ. I couldn't have asked for anything more when it comes to the visuals in this game. They're pretty much perfect, and this level of fidelity is something I honestly didn't think was possible with video games. But then, You combine the graphics and the art direction with the impeccable attention to detail, and that's how you get an experience that is not only great, but truly special. If you've been following my channel, then you already know all about this. But ArcSys put this game together as a true love letter to the original Dragon Ball anime, matching the visuals perfectly in many cases. Keyframe after keyframe are taken straight from the original manga. This kind of love for the original source material is so rare in games in general, let alone Dragon Ball games. Whether you're a hardcore fan of Dragon Ball or someone who has never even seen a single episode, the presentation is incredible, and that's apparent from the very first time you dive into the Versus mode. From the highly detailed dramatic intros and finishes, to the bombastic level 3 animations, to unique intro and outro cutscenes with different dialogue depending on the matchup, all the way to the normals like this elbow from Frieza, just to name one of many frames that ArcSys painstakingly replicated directly from the manga panel. In the end, it results in a jaw-droppingly stunning presentation, no matter what your experience is with the Dragon Ball franchise. But for hardcore fans like myself, the game provides sensory overload as I'm just seeing all of these references jumping at me frame after frame. So many of the legendary moments that made me fall in love with the franchise in the first place are all here, and seeing them replicated in such a spectacular fashion, in such an awesome package that plays so well, it makes me really happy. Dragon Ball FighterZ is a game by Dragon Ball fans for Dragon Ball fans. It's so blatantly clear that this isn't some rushed, low-budget, yearly release made just to hit a deadline. This one is for the fans. And if you love Dragon Ball, but have never picked up a traditional fighting game in your life, I promise you, you will enjoy this game. Likewise, if you aren't a fan of Dragon Ball at all, I'd still recommend this game. No matter your skill level or experience with the franchise, spend 10 minutes messing around and you're bound to see something awesome happen on the screen. It wouldn't shock me if you suddenly have an uncontrollable urge to order Season 1 of DBZ off Amazon after playing it. FighterZ has managed to do something I didn't think was possible. At long last, Budokai 3 has been dethroned. A game that has been the king of Dragon Ball games since its release on the PS2 in 2004. It was a long time coming, but Arc has managed to do it with a truly balanced fighting game that is deep but also accessible, an art style that is true to Toriyama, and a love for the original source material that is sure to have any longtime Dragon Ball fans smiling from ear to ear. The game has some of the best presentation of any game I've ever seen. All of these satisfying animations, amazing cutscenes, and attention to detail, I felt like I was being brought back to the golden days of fighting games. Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Third Strike, Darkstalkers. These games captured my imagination with their vivid art style, incredible animation, and fluid gameplay. FighterZ is like the logical evolution of these 2D fighting games with an anime-inspired art style. And the result is literally the greatest looking fighting game that I've ever seen. The game is an easy 9 out of 10. Dragon Ball FighterZ is the best Dragon Ball video game of all time. If you haven't played it yet, what are you waiting for? Go now! Experience the best Dragon Ball game ever and the best fighting game in years.